Montecito was supposed to be the victory lap. The palm trees, the privacy walls, the celebrity zip code that told the whole world Harry and Meghan had actually won. That leaving royal life behind wasn't a downgrade, it was an upgrade to something bigger. Now Taylor Swift might be moving in right down the street. And honestly, the timing could not possibly land any worse for the people who built their entire second act around that specific address.
So is it really a coincidence that as Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are quietly trying to hawk their Montecito home without putting it on the market and going through the embarrassment of having to do that?
Let me actually set the scene properly first, because the details make this considerably more interesting than a typical real estate rumor. Taylor and Travis Kelce, freshly married since early July, are reportedly browsing property in Montecito. Not tied to one listing, just quietly looking, the way people with unlimited money and zero rush tend to shop. They want a shared home base, somewhere private, somewhere the security team can actually secure. Montecito checks every box. Oprah's already there. The gates are tall. The roads are quiet. On paper, it's an obvious pick. Stop and actually picture what it would mean if this genuinely happens. Meghan spent years turning that specific neighborhood into her headquarters. And now the single biggest name in pop culture might land in the same zip code, at the exact moment people are already whispering about whether Harry and Meghan even stay there long term.
But in terms of this Montecito move, the Royal News Network pointing out, even if Taylor and Travis move to Montecito, they still won't give Harry and Meghan the time of day. And Harry and Meghan spare arguing, please don't insult Taylor and Travis by associating them in any way with the two grifters. Thank you.
That's not some cute celebrity neighbor story you'd read in a lifestyle magazine. That's a full changing of the guard. Playing out in real time, in slow motion, right in front of everyone. Here's the part that makes this so specifically uncomfortable, though. This isn't the first time these two orbits have crossed. Taylor Swift already tried Meghan's world once, on Meghan's own terms. And it went absolutely nowhere. Worth noting quickly, before diving in, that celebrity friendships fail to launch constantly for 100 boring reasons that have nothing to do with any grand rivalry, scheduling, personality mismatch, sheer lack of time. Not every unanswered invitation is a statement, but when the same specific pattern repeats itself 3 separate times across several years, it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like something worth actually paying attention to.
But also, here's where they are in their life, Dan. They got married. Taylor's in her mid-30s. She's always wanted to be a mom. They are looking for a place where they can raise their family, have kids, and good schools all around. And, Montecito does fit that bill. It is private. A lot of billionaires are there. Security is always around. If it's not yours, it's someone else's. And no high crime rate. The schools are excellent. So I could see why they would want to move there.
Rewind to Meghan's Spotify podcast, Archetypes. She was chasing big names. Serena Williams landed, Mariah Carey landed, Paris Hilton landed, but Taylor was the one she really wanted. Not a form email either. Reports say Meghan sent a handwritten personal invitation, the kind of gesture that says, "I'm not treating you like a booking. I want you specifically." Taylor said no, not personally, not with some awkward publicly negotiated middle ground appearance. The decline came through a representative, clean, final, no wiggle room left in it at all. No feud afterward, no drama, just silence where a yes should have been. And silence, when you're building a brand around access and influence, is somehow louder than rejection ever could be. And honestly, it didn't stop there either. The pattern kept quietly repeating itself, one attempt at a time. Meghan reportedly showed up to Taylor's Los Angeles Eras tour stop, was seen having a great time, and there's word she tried to get backstage afterward for a proper hello. That attempt reportedly went nowhere too. The official explanation floating around was that Taylor rests her voice before shows. Maybe that's exactly what happened. Maybe it's the full story. Fair to say, on its own, backstage access after any concert is genuinely difficult even for other famous people. Performers routinely skip meet and greets purely to protect their voice and energy for the next show on the tour. That specific detail alone proves nothing. What stuck, though, is the broader accumulating pattern sitting underneath it.
Remember, Meghan, and this is when she was still big enough to attract some stars, was so desperate to get Taylor Swift
Oh, yes.
on the Archetypes podcast. She wrote her that handwritten missive, and Taylor, when she makes a decision and she is loyal to someone, she sticks by it. But I think more than that, she was just so disgusted about why you would turn on your own blood relatives in the way
Oh, yeah.
that these two did. I mean, Taylor is very, very much a family woman through and through.
Months later, Meghan turned up in a separate viral backstage moment, this time with Beyoncé, which only sharpened the contrast. She could clearly move through elite celebrity spaces. The Taylor connection specifically just never turned into anything visible. Now, here's where this whole thing gets genuinely savage. Because while Taylor was quietly passing on Meghan over and over across multiple separate attempts spanning years, she was simultaneously building an entirely different royal relationship in the background, one warm gesture at a time. Just not the one anyone watching this story would have expected back when it originally started. Go back to 2013. William gets up on stage with Taylor Swift and Jon Bon Jovi at a charity gig. Loose, genuinely funny, completely unforced in that specific, memorable way that clips end up living online forever, precisely because nobody planned it that carefully. Nobody staged that particular connection after the fact for PR purposes. It simply existed, organically, years before any of this current comparison ever mattered to anyone watching. Fast forward to 2024. William reportedly takes George and Charlotte along to Taylor's massive London Eras tour show. They go backstage afterward. They actually meet her properly, not a rushed hallway hello. Travis is reportedly there too, already part of the picture by that point. The photos that eventually surface tell their own story on their own. William looking genuinely relaxed rather than performing for cameras. The kids visibly thrilled in that unmistakable, unfaked way kids look when something is actually exciting to them. And Taylor herself completely at ease with the entire family, nothing stiff or staged about any of it. Then, this past May specifically, ahead of Taylor and Travis's actual wedding, they reportedly sat down for a private, unhurried meeting with William and Catherine in London. The kind of gesture nobody arranges for a passing acquaintance.
And it all just goes back to the fact that, Dan, 60 million pounds for 500 people to compete. And again, as we saw in Tom Bower's book, nobody actually shows up to watch the athletes. They show up for the big concert, which in Vancouver was Katy Perry. And who's going to play in Birmingham? We don't know. But it's just a lot of money, and people are not sure where it goes, and there's not a lot of money left over. So where are you spending this money? How is this allowed to happen? Where are the accountants?
Not a rushed backstage hello squeezed between costume changes. An actual private meeting. That's not a fan moment. That's a real relationship with real warmth behind it. So genuinely sit with the sheer absurdity of the whole situation for a second, because it honestly deserves a real dedicated moment before we move on to everything else this connects to. Living behind the same set of gates doesn't automatically mean sharing dinners. It doesn't mean casual invites dropped by text. It doesn't mean a spontaneous selfie at the local farmer's market. And it definitely, almost comically, doesn't mean Taylor Swift suddenly showing up in one of Meghan's lifestyle Instagram posts holding a jar of that jam. If Taylor and Travis genuinely end up living behind the exact same Montecito gates as Harry and Meghan, geography alone buys absolutely nothing. Proximity has never once guaranteed friendship, no matter how many magazine profiles suggest otherwise. The royal connection Taylor actually built runs straight through Kensington Palace, warm and established, not through some accidental hedge-adjacent introduction in California. That's the specific detail Meghan reportedly has to live with now. The exact person she once tried hardest to bring into her own orbit ended up finding a genuine royal friendship anyway, just with the other brother entirely. And while all of this plays out publicly on the celebrity side of the story, something else entirely, something quieter, is apparently shifting with Harry himself. And honestly, this might be the actual bigger story sitting underneath everything we've covered so far tonight.
She doesn't do that. We saw that with Archewell in the fact that she gave over $50,000 of Archewell money to a organization that was headed by an Islamist, and then was like, oops. And once it was made public by yours truly, they yanked the money immediately, but damage was already done. They don't do research. Meghan didn't even watch the movie because it's not that sweet.
Harry is reportedly planning to return to Britain every few months for the next year. Not an emergency visit. Not a single court appearance squeezed in and out. A regular, recurring rhythm. More time with family. More time reconnecting with the British charities that predate Meghan entirely. Predate Montecito. Predate the whole Netflix chapter of his life. There's reportedly another UK trip planned for September, about a week long. Here's the specific detail out of all of this that actually stopped me cold when I first read it. After his recent time with King Charles, Harry was reportedly described as energized by the reunion. Energized, not tolerated, not white-knuckling his way through an obligation. Energized, the kind of word that suggests Britain still gives him something California simply can't replicate.
There is a school of thought that the PR team is saying, and Meghan, because Meghan, again, her allure to Harry is, my mother sent me to her. And my mother would have approved. And, he's obsessed with his mother. And Meghan wears the perfume. Meghan, if we go, you can go online and just look up Diana and Meghan. And Meghan is wearing all of Diana's outfits. Now, granted, they're not the exact same clothes, but they look very similar. She's going for the similar look. She is going for the similar ethos. She wants people to think of her as Princess Diana.
History, belonging, relevance that doesn't require a branding team to manufacture it. It's worth being fair here for a second, too. One warm word from an anonymous source describing one reunion isn't proof of some grand life pivot on its own. People have good days for all kinds of reasons, and a single positive descriptor doesn't automatically rewrite 6 years of stated priorities. Still, for years, the entire public narrative ran one direction. California equals freedom. Britain equals pressure and danger. Montecito was supposed to be the answer to all of that. Now the man who made the most public exit in modern royal history is apparently building a calendar that keeps pulling him back across the Atlantic over and over. And to be clear, no, there's been no formal announcement of anything resembling a comeback. No half-in, half-out arrangement sitting on anyone's desk waiting for a signature. But that's exactly why this version of the strategy actually works. A formal comeback would explode. Quiet, repeated visits don't. One trip, one charity appearance, one photo with his father, then another trip a few months later. You don't need to announce a return if you can simply make someone's presence feel normal again. One visit at a time. He doesn't need a palace balcony moment. Doesn't need a new title. Doesn't need a press release declaring anything. He just needs to keep showing up. Around respectable causes. Around his father when the doors open. Until the story quietly shifts from exiled prince visiting home to prince who's simply around again. That would honestly be a genuinely striking, almost poetic reversal from exactly where this whole saga originally started back in January 2020, back when nobody could have predicted any of this specific version of events, when Harry and Meghan first proposed exactly the kind of hybrid arrangement Queen Elizabeth ultimately rejected.
The palace PR machine as a spoiled, narcissistic, just angry man, not even young anymore, turning into a middle-aged, angry man. And I have talked to several friends who actually worked with him. They were in the charity field and they worked with him when he was with the palace. And they said they always couldn't stand him unless the cameras were there and unless he was speaking to somebody with a title or somebody he thought was important. He was absolutely rude and would just demand things left, right, and center.
1 foot in royal life, 1 foot fully independent, financially and otherwise. The Queen drew a hard line. You don't get to cash in on royal status while dipping back into official duties whenever it's convenient. That specific line was genuinely supposed to be permanent. A hard, settled boundary nobody expected to see quietly dissolve over time. 6 years later, it's looking considerably blurrier if Harry's flying back on a recurring schedule, reconnecting with the family, quietly rebuilding a public British footprint, all while technically still calling California home. And what if there's a version of return that never gets officially named as one? He lives in California, but he's in Britain every few months. He's not a working royal, but he keeps a visible role through long-standing causes. He's not formally back inside the institution, but he's steadily rebuilding contact with the king. Nobody announces a restoration, it just quietly becomes true. Which raises the genuinely obvious next question that most coverage of this story keeps skipping past entirely. Where exactly is Meghan sitting in all of this? So far, every part of this British rhythm centers on Harry alone. There's no indication Meghan plans to mirror it, no sign she's building a parallel life back in the UK alongside him. That doesn't prove separation. It doesn't prove anything dramatic, but it does create a genuinely new visual. Harry increasingly facing east, while Meghan's entire brand, business, and social world stays planted firmly in California. That specific visual genuinely matters, because if Harry starts spending real, meaningful time in Britain again on a recurring basis, Montecito stops being quite so obviously and unambiguously the actual center of his everyday life. It might still be home. His family might still live there full-time, but his actual identity has always carried more weight on the other side of the Atlantic. In America, he's a famous prince. Interesting, but ultimately one celebrity among many. In Britain, he's the king's son, the future king's brother, a man whose entire public story is permanently stitched into the monarchy itself. California gave him distance from all of that. Britain hands it right back. And after years spent trying to build an entirely separate Sussex universe from scratch, Harry might be quietly discovering that the royal connection was never baggage he could simply set down. It was the exact thing that made the world care about him in the first place. Which brings this whole thing back around, finally, to Montecito itself, and why this specific timing lands with such perfect, almost cinematic precision. On one side, Taylor and Travis reportedly eyeing the neighborhood as newlyweds, arriving with enormous cultural weight already built in, a genuinely global fan base, established friendships, and a warm, real history with William and Catherine specifically. She doesn't need Montecito to matter. Montecito would simply be lucky to have her. On the other side, Harry and Meghan, whose mansion became something close to a monument to the decision to walk away from royal life entirely, while chatter about that same property's future keeps quietly resurfacing, and Harry now appears to be building a schedule that pulls him steadily back toward the exact institution he left. Genuinely picture the actual contrast for a second, in vivid detail, if Taylor really does end up buying property there this year. The Sussexes arrived in California selling the entire world on the idea that they were stepping into the absolute top tier of American celebrity, essentially from scratch. Taylor, by comparison, would simply arrive as the top tier of American celebrity, full stop, no explanation needed, no reinvention required, no royal title needed to open a single door, no carefully staged lifestyle rollout with matching branded content. Just Taylor Swift, quietly showing up as Taylor Swift, exactly as she already is. Meanwhile, entirely separately, the persistent questions circulating around the Sussex property specifically haven't actually gone away. Repeated talk of a potential sale, or at minimum quiet interest being tested behind closed doors. None of that needs an official announcement to become a real story. Property at that level gets discussed in private circles long before any public listing ever surfaces. That's exactly what makes this Taylor story land with such force. One couple potentially moving in, the other couple's future there getting quietly questioned at the exact same moment. For Harry and Meghan specifically, that particular house was always genuinely more than just a house sitting on expensive land. It was, essentially, the physical backdrop for the entire post-palace fantasy they'd built. California freedom, celebrity friendships, streaming deals, private gardens, backyard chickens, poolside mornings. The message baked into every carefully framed photo was simple. This is our kingdom now. Kingdoms tend to look considerably smaller, though, once someone genuinely far more famous quietly moves in right next door. And if Taylor genuinely does settle there, there's no reason to assume Meghan suddenly gets pulled into her orbit. Meghan could end up with Taylor Swift living practically down the road, while Taylor's real royal friendship stays exactly where it's always been, thousands of miles away, with William and Catherine. Distance was never the actual obstacle here. Access was. And if anyone understands that proximity doesn't automatically buy friendship, it's Meghan. Montecito is genuinely full of rich, famous people quietly living parallel lives behind separate hedges. This was never going to be two couples shouting across a fence. It's simply the brutal coincidence of timing. Taylor and Travis potentially moving toward Montecito at the exact moment Harry appears to be moving, both emotionally and professionally, back toward Britain. And Meghan sits directly in the middle of the most uncomfortable version of this contrast imaginable. The superstar she once personally tried to recruit for her podcast could become a literal neighbor. That same superstar built an easier, warmer relationship with William's entire family instead. And her own husband is now apparently preparing to spend considerably more time around the country and the institution they both once walked away from. So genuinely, what exactly is Montecito even functioning as at this specific point in the story? Is it still the permanent Sussex home base, the fortress they've built an entire identity around? Or is it slowly becoming an extremely expensive property attached to a chapter that simply doesn't read as triumphant as it once did? 5 years and one very different neighborhood conversation later? Still the permanent Sussex base? Meghan's California fortress? Or simply an extremely expensive house attached to a chapter that doesn't look nearly as triumphant as it did 5 years ago? Because the underlying story here really has flipped entirely, in a way almost nobody would have called 5 years ago. Back then, Harry and Meghan were unmistakably the ones leaving Britain behind for a fresh start in California. Now Taylor Swift might be the one arriving in Montecito instead, while Harry, of all people, keeps quietly, steadily, deliberately looking back toward the exact home he once insisted he had to escape. That's about as complete and as satisfying a reversal as this entire multi-year story could possibly produce. And honestly, we're probably not even done watching it play out. If there's one thing this whole saga has taught anyone paying attention, it's that timing in this world has a genuinely brutal sense of humor. Meghan spent years chasing exactly the kind of validation Taylor Swift represents. Cultural weight so enormous it doesn't need a title or a royal connection attached to make it matter. And now that same validation might simply be moving in next door, entirely on its own terms, without needing anything from anyone. Nobody knows yet whether Taylor and Travis actually close on a property there. Nobody knows whether Harry's UK visits keep expanding the way they're reportedly currently planned, or quietly fizzle out the way plenty of ambitious schedules eventually do once real life gets in the way. But the fact that both stories are unfolding simultaneously, right now, in the same general orbit, says something worth sitting with regardless of how either one actually plays out.